The Britanic, a proud titan of the ocean. Along with the Olympic and Titanic, she was to be a member of the White Star Line's elite trio of grand ships. A jewel of the sea carrying patrons back and forth across the Atlantic in a lucrative race for passenger dollars. Her builders hoped she would bring the White Star Line back to prominence after the Titanic tragedy. She was larger, safer, yet today she sits at the bottom of the Mediterranean, a victim of World War I and a relic of her time. The circumstances of her sinking remain a mystery, waiting to be unlocked by the adventurers who possess the necessary requirements of spirit, determination, and skill. Like a siren, she calls them. She is the Britanic, the largest liner ever sunk. As challenging as space, the ocean is among the final frontiers for man to explore. Often dangerous, cold, and foreign, the underwater world holds many mysteries. Perhaps the most intriguing of these mysteries are the ones that are man-made. Shipwrecks, tragic symbols that we have not yet mastered the fury of the ocean. The human preoccupation with shipwrecks is understandable. Sometimes they are well preserved, other times not. But they are nonetheless time capsules of a bygone era, a moment frozen in time. Simon Mills is a leading historian on the sunken ships of the White Star Line.
Shipwrecks seem to have a certain magnetism for divers these days. And these days, of course, technology for divers is getting so much more advanced. As a result, Britanic at 400 feet is now probably one of the sort of most sought-after expeditions if you can arrange it.
The grand ship rests at the bottom of the Kea Channel under the jurisdiction of the Greek government. The UK Ministry of Defence and a private organisation known as Governcheck Limited also retain the British rights to the wreck. To allow a dive, all three parties must be satisfied that any expedition has scientific and historic merit. Legendary oceanographer Jacques Cousteau was the first to locate the Britanic in 1975, undisturbed for 60 years below 400 feet of water. Just finding the ship was a considerable accomplishment, given that the British Admiralty's coordinates were significantly off.
Britanic was lost for a number of reasons, but the most important one was basically that the Admiralty chart that Cousteau had in his possession was incorrect. The position of the wreck was some 8 miles from where she was supposed to be, and no one can really explain why this is. Now, there was a big British naval survey done of the area in 1947, which first misplaced the wreck. But the fact is that had they taken a bit more time to check the historical archives and the Britannic's log, they would have actually come to the area where they located her a lot quicker. Now, these documents have never been classified, but the problem is because they didn't know where to look in the first place, a lot of rumours subsequently sprung up. Why was the ship misplaced? Was there a reason that the British government deliberately misplaced her on the map so that people wouldn't find her? But that's just the way it goes. A little more research in the records office, you would have found her probably in days.
Though a successful endeavour, Cousteau was limited by the diving and photographic technology of his time, and his expedition raised more questions than answers. Underwater explorer Robert Ballard was the next to visit the Britanic, leading an extremely well-financed expedition in 1995 to continue where Cousteau left off. Using a nuclear-powered Navy submarine and various remotely operated vehicles, Ballard was able to acquire footage of the external superstructure of the ship. Despite this, neither the main wreck nor the debris field shed much light on the continuing controversy over what exactly sank the ship.
The last statement in his book, to get more answers about the Britanic, you would have to penetrate the hull of the ship. Well, that's exactly what we're going to do.
Inspired by the discoveries and still unanswered questions presented by Cousteau and Ballard, The Global Underwater Explorers, a small resilient group of highly trained shipwreck and cave divers, led by Jared Jablonski, intend to do what these two giants could not, to become the first humans to extensively penetrate and document the inner recesses of the ship since its unbelievable and unexplained sinking on November 21st, 1916.
I get mostly interested in diving locations that I can hopefully have some kind of impact. And most of our projects are associated with sort of conservation or preservation. But when I learned that we could potentially help solve some mystery, as well as to sort of preserve the Britanic through film, I started to get kind of excited about the possibility.
The clues to the Britannic's sinking are 400 feet below the ocean's surface. Beyond the physical challenges of the hostile depth, this journey will take the GUE divers into a much deeper realm, into a time and place where World War I burned with a fury fueled by politics, espionage, and conspiracy. Like a time capsule, she holds the answers to questions asked nearly a century ago. Did she hit a mine, or was she attacked and sunk by a German torpedo? The Britannic's mysterious death has always been a point of intrigue for historians and shipwreck enthusiasts. Within this murky labyrinth, the GUE divers will look for the truth. They will examine all elements that may have caused Britannic's sinking, including open portals, inoperable watertight doors, and the theory of the secondary explosion, which will take them deep into the ship's cargo holds and coal bunkers.
The process of trying to ferret out some of the mystery associated with the Britannic, we really read a lot of the accounts. You know, why did she sink? What kinds of conspiracy theories were associated with her sinking? So I try to take a relatively scientific view of the thing, of the process, and say, you know, a negative result is still a positive result, in the sense that everybody says, okay, she was carrying munitions that exploded. Well, if we check all the cargo holds and can't find any evidence, then it seems pretty unlikely that she was carrying anything of any relative significance. If people say there were additional explosions and we're unable to locate any, looking in all of the places where those are allegedly occurring, then we're able to establish that's not the case. So our goal was to look at what people had alleged or claimed in the past and to say, yes, this is possible, yes, it's true, or no, it doesn't appear to be true at all.
Hidden within the wreckage is the explanation as to why a ship that underwent stringent safety measures following Titanic's demise could sink in only 55 minutes, almost 3 times as fast as it took Titanic to sink. Because of the dangerous nature of the expedition, the team takes great care and attention in preparation. Their lives will depend on following a complex set of rules, where percentages and time must be accurate. Diving 400 feet is considered extremely dangerous and life-threatening. It pushes the limits of the human body. The divers will breathe a specially created cocktail in their tanks called Trimix. Failure to decompress properly will lead to a painful, if not fatal, bout of decompression sickness, also known as the bends.
Nothing's for free. You pay a price for everything. And for the dives we're doing, we pay a very, very high price in decompression obligation.
As you're scootering along the wreck and you see something, you're at the end of your bottom time, you scooter over to take a look at it, you think it's only a few feet away. In reality, it could take you a minute or two to scooter to it. That extra minute or two to go over and a minute or two to come back, 5 minutes more of bottom time can easily add over an hour to your decompression obligation. So when you do that, you're making decisions every minute as to how much more time you are willing to take at the bottom, and also your team members are going to have to take in order to support you for the rest of the dive.
So we spanned anywhere from about 20 minutes to dives that some of us did that would exceed 40 minutes, in which case decompression times, total in-water time, would range from under 2 hours to somewhere approaching 5 hours.
Jared holds world records in cave exploration, including the deepest dive penetration inland into the Earth ever recorded, 18,000 feet, nearly 3 miles away from an air source at a depth of 300 feet. For that particular dive, he spent an astounding 20 hours in decompression. But decompression is only one of the difficulties of this dive.
It's imperative for us to mix our own gas. The depths at which we're diving, you cannot use just pure air. Pure air will kill you at depths as shallow as 200, 250 feet.
The divers begin each dive with 5 tanks and a scooter, totaling well over 200 pounds.
Go! We are certainly using some of the most advanced equipment and techniques that are out there in scuba diving. But what we're trying to do is never fully be dependent on that techie or high-tech equipment. We're still the core of our abilities revolves around the skill of the diver.
And it will be this skill and experience that will determine whether the questions of the Britannic's sinking will be answered. A ship whose origins are directly related to the most famous shipwreck in history. April 14th, 1912, the evening the dream died. The evening that the unthinkable took place when the RMS Titanic hit an iceberg on her maiden voyage. 1,502 people perished in what has become one of the most defining moments of the 20th century. Much has been said about the Titanic, but the fact remains. In less than 3 hours, a ship that was dubbed practically unsinkable by experts disappeared into oblivion at the bottom of the North Atlantic. The Titanic tragedy would have substantial effects on the safety measures of ships worldwide, including her sister, the Britanic, which was still under construction in the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast.
The loss of the Titanic highlighted a number of very serious flaws in the design of the Olympic-class liners. Because the forward part of the Titanic had been kind of cut open, almost like a can opener, 5 compartments have been opened to the water. Now, a Titanic could survive with any 4 of her forward compartments flooded. Because 5 compartments were open to the water, it was kind of like an ice cube tray. The bulkheads didn't go high enough, and so one after another, the water slopped from one to the other, gradually pulling the head down until the ship sank. To protect Britanic from the same fate that caught up with the Titanic, they decided to raise the height of the forward bulkheads so that they went as high as the B deck, effectively up to the top of the actual hull itself. In theory, that, combined with the double skin running alongside the boiler rooms and the engine rooms, Britanic was supposed to float with any of her first forward 6 compartments flooded.
Working in conjunction with the bulkheads were the ship's electrically operated watertight doors, which separated the ship into compartments. If one area of the vessel was punctured, the watertight doors were closed and the compartment was isolated to protect the rest of the ship. With all of these modifications, the Britanic would have theoretically been able to survive a collision similar to the one suffered by the Titanic. Externally, the Britanic remained nearly identical to the Titanic, with one important exception: lifeboats. On the Titanic, lifeboat capacity was roughly 1/3 of the ship's total number of passengers and crew. Though this may seem irresponsible, the White Star Line actually exceeded the requirements of the British Board of Trade for the number of lifeboats for a vessel of Titanic size.
When Britanic was being built, they had to take into account the new legislation. She had to have enough lifeboats for everybody on board. Now, for all 3,500 people on the Britanic, that would have meant an enormous amount of lifeboats running along the boat deck. They tried it on the Olympic, and it worked, but they lost an awful lot of open space on the boat deck. So what they did on Britanic was like a sort of experiment.
The Britanic was to be fitted with 8 sets of gantry davits, which were prepared to carry 46 lifeboats, including 2 which were motorized.
The idea being simply that the open space would be retained on the ship, while at the same time they would be able to lower the boats, because of the huge size of the davits, even further away from the side of the ship. That way, in rough weather, or if the ship was leaning to one side, they could keep working longer.
The rumoured final change in Britanic was her name. It is alleged that she was originally to be dubbed the Gigantic. However, with the Titanic tragedy still so fresh, it is believed that White Star was fearful of again tempting fate with a grandiose name. With its patriotic overtones, Britanic was seen as more fitting. With all of the safety modifications, the gross tonnage of the Britanic would approach nearly 50,000 tons, making her the largest British ship in the world and the pride of the White Star Line. She was launched on February 26, 1914, with plans to commence service between Southampton and New York in the spring of 1915. But she would never be given the opportunity to fulfill her role as the world's premier luxury liner. World War I would change her fate and give her a much greater calling. Unraveling the mystery of the Britanic starts here, day one of the dive. The calm and focus of the divers is masked by the excitement and prospects of finally being able to see the grand ship. But in the back of their minds, each diver knows that a myriad of things can go wrong.
Yeah, our primary job will be to just drop through the port side damage into the ship itself. Right. Evaluate starboard side damage, size, scope, nature of that, see if you can see anything. Probably it'll all be filled in sand, but maybe you can tell that it's a blow inward as it should be. Then immediately evaluate, what cargo or passage is available. First cargo, then passage. Okay. So see, looking towards the bow side, can I get into anything? Are there any cargo holds in here? Is it all just twisted metal? If there isn't anything that way, then we'll start working our way stern, looking for the same thing. Cargo first, and then passage next. See if we can find a way through there.
Step one for the expedition is attaching a floating buoy called an upline to the Britanic. This will allow the crew to easily find the ship each day and will also act as the decompression line for the divers.
They're going to drop the chain down the upline. We're going to start assembling our equipment and getting into our suits. As soon as they've got the chain down and we're in our suits, we're going in.
We hit the water and we start to cruise down. As we're cruising down, we start to feel a little bit of current coming down the line. We're cruising down the line, the current starts to subside at about 100 feet or so. Continue on down, do the gas switch at 190 to the back gas and continuing down. Didn't really see the wreck at all, just kept on going down, kept on going down, kept on going down, kept on going down, and all of a sudden I started to see the anchor line, and I'm like, hey, cool, there's the anchor line. Hey, it's attached to something. Look up, and there's just this enormous wreck in front of me. I mean, a monster. You can't believe the size of it.
The Goliath known as the Britanic, still majestic even as a fallen vessel.
It was amazing. I mean, it was just totally incredible. The first dive that we did was, of course, the first day going down and moving the grapple hook up and securing the anchor line, and the visibility that day had to be at least 200 feet. Looking up and from the bottom at 385 feet, looking up and seeing a great big, just a huge, amazing wreck with incredible visibility, sun coming down just right, lots of fish around, and being able to look up was almost like looking up a mountain.
Her hull is devoid of the rusticles that have overtaken the Titanic. Instead, the Britanic is now a man-made coral reef. Society's elite and hopeful immigrants were meant to stroll her decks, but she is now a bustling marine community. Many of her brilliant features are still recognizable.
Interesting to try to picture what the ship was like. You get just a slight glimpse of what the past was like, and now a real big glimpse of what it currently looks like.
After 2 successful days of diving, the third day presents the team with their biggest challenge yet, nature. Quick and radical weather changes, coupled with 10-foot ocean swells, pummel the team's small support boat. Sailing back to port would mean abandoning the divers already in the water. The crew on board has no choice but to wait and hope that the ship holds up.
We'd get up at the crack of dawn, 5, 6, 7 o'clock, get the boat loaded. We'd get out to location like 8, 8:30. We'd have divers in the water at 9. Well, between 9 o'clock and 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when these divers start coming up, the weather changed dramatically.
Once the divers complete their 5-hour decompression, bringing them back on board the ship with their 200 pounds of equipment becomes nearly as dangerous as the dive itself.
The challenge then becomes to retrieve these divers and retrieve their equipment safely and efficiently. The things that we're worried about is obviously, first of all, the safety of the diver. Second of all, the security of the equipment. Because if we lose equipment or break equipment, then that jeopardizes our mission objectives for the project.
Risking it is about risk versus benefit. And I looked at the risk and I said, you know, the benefit of actually unlocking the mystery and going inside and being the first to go inside with some real exploration, with some real video cameras and bringing that documentation back was important to me. That was an important objective. And so the benefit of doing that would outweigh the risk.
The members of the GUE are now ready. With 3 days of preliminary diving behind them, the divers set out to explore the insides of the ship for the first time, to answer questions locked within 50,000 tons of iron, secrets untold for almost a century. World War I, the beginning of modern warfare and one of the bloodiest wars ever recorded. Over 30 nations were involved, with casualties exceeding 37 million. At the inception of the war in August of 1914, it was thought that the fighting might end quickly, perhaps even as early as Christmas. But the war dragged on and only seemed to gain momentum. To feed the war machine, the British Admiralty, the officer in charge of British naval operations, began to requisition a large number of ships for use as armed merchant cruisers and troop transports. As the war progressed, the result was human carnage. Casualties mounted, and there was a clear need to transport them out of the war zone. Her gigantic proportions could no longer sit unused. On November 13, 1915, the Britanic was officially requisitioned by the British Admiralty for use as a hospital ship.
The Britanic lay around at Harland and Wolff for the first 15 months of the war doing virtually nothing. But I think it's around about halfway through 1915 that the Admiralty finally woke up to the fact that they had to use the larger ships. They kept taking more and more of the smaller vessels, and it was having an increasingly more and more difficult effect on the actual carrying capacity of the existing shipping lines. They couldn't maintain the commercial routes and the war supplies with the vessels they had. The Admiralty were forced, kicking and screaming, but they were forced into literally calling up the Olympic, Aquitania, Mauretania and Britanic for service.
Because all raw materials and manpower were needed for the war effort, the finishing details of Britanic's luxurious interior were never fully completed. But it would not matter. It made her makeover into a hospital ship that much easier. The elegant public rooms were converted into operating quarters and wards.
She was a hollow shell. There was nothing in terms of furnishings that had to be taken ashore and stored away. But nonetheless, it still took the better part of 6 weeks just to make her seaworthy. The davits were incomplete. The ship had never been out on trials and had never even been on service at all. So nobody knew if the engines would work properly. So it wasn't really just a case of sort of sitting down sort of saying, OK, here's a nice new hospital ship. Britanic had to be checked out to make sure that she was seaworthy.
With the conversion, the Britanic was a giant floating infirmary, able to carry over 3,300 casualties. On the exterior, she featured a new look. The white star buff of her funnels was replaced with an unfamiliar yellow. She was also given a white hull, with a green stripe roughly midway from stem to stern post, interrupted in 3 spots by large red hospital crosses. 2 more crosses were featured above on the boat deck. This color scheme was the international identification of a hospital ship and would assure that enemy vessels would not in any way be confused. As a hospital ship, according to the Geneva Convention, the Britanic was now untouchable in war. On December 12, 1915, she was ready for service and commissioned as the HMHS Britanic, His Majesty's hospital ship.
Britannic's captain was Charles Alfred Bartlett. He was actually the White Star Marine Superintendent at Liverpool and had held that post since 1912, shortly before the Titanic sank. Bartlett was actually a very good choice for commander because not only had he been heavily involved in the post-Titanic disaster with Harland and Wolff trying to sort out what had gone wrong, but he was effectively the man who had overseen the construction of Britanic, so he effectively knew that ship inside out. He knew everything about her. He had also commanded some of White Star's largest ships, so he was in every way a very appropriate choice.
On November 12, 1916, the Britanic departed from Southampton, carrying only her crew and complement of medical personnel, which totaled 1,062 on board. She was expected to pick up several thousand more casualties at Mudros, located on the Greek island of Limnos. It was only her 6th voyage through the Mediterranean. By the morning of November 21st, Britanic was off the Gulf of Athens, steaming at 20 knots into the Kea Channel, between the southernmost points of Attica and the island of Kea.
By the morning of 21st of November, 8 o'clock in the morning, everything was so incredibly normal, it's unbelievable. The doors down, the watertight doors down below in the engine rooms would have been open while the stokehold crews changed their watch. The medical staff were all at breakfast. The watch was changing on the bridge, changing in the crow's nest. Nothing was at all out of place. It was a beautiful morning. Britanic was making 20 knots. Sea was as smooth as anything. And there was not a care in the world, essentially. And then suddenly, around about 12 minutes past 8, there was a huge explosion.
It was described as a dull, deafening roar. The mysterious blast had occurred at the starboard side of the ship between cargo holds 2 and 3, but the force of the explosion had also damaged the watertight bulkhead between holds 1 and the forepeak. This meant that the first 4 watertight compartments of Britanic were rapidly filling with water.
Captain Bartlett's immediate response, as in all occurrences of this sort, was 1, to stop the engines and to sort of close the watertight doors. Now, of course, unfortunately, there was a serious problem in the forward half of the ship. For some strange reason, nobody knows why, it seems that some of the watertight doors could not close properly.
Now water was flowing further aft into boiler room 5, but the ship held up. The next extended bulkhead between boiler rooms 4 and 5 was undamaged and protected the 7th compartment from being flooded. The Britanic had reached the limits of her construction. It was ironic. She was modified to have been able to survive what sank the Titanic, and given her ability to stay afloat with 6 compartments flooded, she would have. It took even worse circumstances to foil the carefully crafted safety innovations of the Britanic.
Now, Britanic should have been able to survive that scale of damage. It was in her design specifications. But the problem was, as she was moving forward, she was taking on more water, and she was beginning to list to starboard. Now, the starboard list brought in another factor, which nobody had really thought about at the time, namely a number of open portholes on the side of the ship. They'd actually been opened by the medical staff. They were arriving at Mudros later that morning, and they wanted to air out the wards. It was a nice thought as far as the patients were concerned, but unfortunately it was proved disastrous as far as the Britanic itself was concerned, because as the ship began to lean over to starboard, so these portholes, open portholes, behind the 6 open compartments of the sea, began to take in additional water. And once the 7th compartment was breached, it was only a matter of time before the ship went down.
Unaware of the chaos below, Captain Bartlett remained on the bridge, optimistic that he would find a way to save his vessel. To his right, he was tempted by the close shores of the island of Kea. It was his opportunity to save the ship. He would attempt to beach the Britanic on the coast. At this point in time, it was a crucial error that made the disaster more than the loss of a magnificent ship, but a tragic loss of life. In an act that would seem like common sense, in which nothing should go wrong, unauthorized lifeboats were being lowered into the water. Unauthorized because the official order was never given by the captain. this would prove disastrous.
Now, no official order had gone out to release the boats, yet for some reasons which still remain unclear. You read some people say they sort of saw many boats in the water. Some say a couple were released without authority. Whatever the case may be, at least 2 boats were released when they shouldn't have been. No official order had come from the bridge. And as a result, as the Britanic was moving forward, these 2 boats on the port side were pulled along the side of the ship straight towards the working propellers.
Like a magnet, the merciless spinning propellers attracted 2 of the lifeboats that were lowered into the water, sucking them in and smashing them to pieces. The results were horrific. As the Britanic attempted to reach the island, more water entered her forward compartments, expediting her sinking. Realizing this, Captain Bartlett ordered engines stopped and officially gave the order to abandon ship, effectively surrendering the Britanic to the ocean. The Britanic rolled over on her starboard side with her funnels collapsing from the pressure. The Titan was dead. That same morning, a 5-year-old boy was sweeping the steps of a local church overlooking the ocean.
Μόλις ήρχανε και πήγε απάνω την τελευταία φορά, έκανε σφύριους συνέχεια. Έκανε την κλίση αυτή. Οπ, και πήγε ορθό κάτω. Πήγε ορθό κάτω στον πάτο, με τον καπετάνιο μαζί.
Survivors were taken for medical treatment on the island. A total of 1,032 people were saved that day. 30 lost their lives. Had the Britanic been carrying a full load of severely injured soldiers, it could have been a catastrophe, a situation in which thousands of wounded would have been helpless. The death toll could have surpassed that of the Titanic. But, as it was, the loss of the Britanic was another humbling blow to her creators and to the public at large. After the Britanic disaster, the public demanded answers. Then, as it does now, the debate centered around the 2 main suspects, mine or torpedo. The first possibility was that the Britanic sank after colliding with a mine. The Germans were indeed placing mines in the Kea Channel. They used both drifting mines, which floated at the surface like barrels, and moored mines, which were attached to anchors on the sea floor and were not visible to passing ships. It has been documented that one German submarine, U-73, was laying moored mines in the Kea Channel just weeks before Britannic's fateful voyage.
The mine had actually been in the Kea Channel for almost a month. The indications seemed to be that the minefield, 12 mines were laid by a German submarine, the U-73. It was commanded by a Kapitänleutnant Gustav Seiss. The mines were laid on the morning of the 28th of October. The other additional irony is that it's entirely possible that shortly after the mines were laid, Captain Seiss actually observed the Britanic through his periscope on her previous voyage.
So far, no anchor chains have been found on the ocean bottom near the area of the explosion. But there was another perspective. With World War I raging and propaganda necessary, the British press made up its mind. The Britanic had been deliberately torpedoed by a German U-boat. At the time, there was some substance to this allegation. It was only a year and a half earlier that the passenger ship Lusitania, while returning from New York, was torpedoed near the Irish coast by a U-boat. The Germans claimed she was carrying munitions. 1,200 civilians perished. Some aboard the Britanic claimed that she was hit by a torpedo. During his expedition, Jacques Cousteau questioned some of the Britannic survivors about what they believed caused the explosion. The consensus was a torpedo, but given the nature of World War I torpedoes, with their visible bubble trails, surely a definite sighting of a torpedo would have taken place. It was a clear Mediterranean morning, and visibility was good. The 1916 official British report only stated the obvious. The explosion was due to either a mine or torpedo. If she was attacked, why? Why would the Germans fire on an innocent hospital ship? Could it be that they saw beyond her hospital crosses? Perhaps she was disguising her true mission as a munitions resupply ship. Being the biggest British liner in the world, her enormous cargo holds could easily resupply an army. But the question remains, what caused the tremendous wound in her bow? On their own, a single mine or torpedo could not have caused that much damage. Perhaps the explosion came from within, originating from her secret illegal cargo, which would still exist inside the Britanic. The expedition is going well, and with the dive team 400 feet below, the support team at the ocean's surface are doing what they can to protect the divers.
One of the scariest parts about the mission was that we were in a shipping lane. And when I say we're in a shipping lane, we're in a huge shipping lane. All you could see is the bow of these ships coming at you. And you know you're sitting over this yellow ball that's floating in the water. And you know that's the only thing that's where your divers are at. Sometimes they're on deco. And we'd have to go out in front of the ship and make circles. And we'd wave our arms, and we'd sit there and yell and scream, and we would do it because we wanted the ships to turn. And it seemed like forever before they noticed us. And basically what would happen, it would just go right over the top of the diver.
For the members of the GUE, a major point of the external investigation of the ship is documenting as much as possible. The team is able to gather the first recorded measurements of the split between the bow and the rest of the ship.
The thing that struck me most when I first looked at the Britannic's damage spot is it really differed fairly notably from some of the early accounts that I'd heard, in the sense that it was sort of a small rip or a tear, that just went through, and you could see the sand below through this sort of tear. It seemed to me more like the whole part of the bow had been literally ripped open, and it was fairly extensive. The whole area, sort of towards midships, was really a rather jumbled mess of metal.
The separation in the bow and the sinking of the ship in only 55 minutes have been the evidence most used for the theory of a secondary explosion, an explosion which may have had multiple origins, including highly explosive coal and coal dust, or even illegally transported arms. The feature that makes this exploration of the Britanic different from all of the others, and what inspires these divers to risk their lives, are the all-important and unexplored interior decks. Great care and respect is taken in entering the cavernous Britanic. The GUE team members are dedicated to preserving the natural condition of every dive site. The fact that the Britanic is officially a British war grave makes this even more important. The interior of this once glamorous ship is now a labyrinth of twisted metal. Beyond getting lost is the danger of collapsing wreckage. Even the percolation of the air bubbles produced by the divers can cause an avalanche of debris.
We started to look at this huge bow of the ship, the cargo hold in the bow of the ship, and the first few levels were actually cruise quarters. And so you're swimming down this, what seemed to be a vertical shaft. Now remember that the ship's laying on the starboard side, so things are a little disorientating, if you know what I mean. You're trying to figure out, okay, this is the way it is, and you're cruising down this hole, starting to notice the actual cargo hold. And I could tell it was the cargo hold because I'm used to seeing from other wrecks cargo holds that have got these metal step ladders that the crew could climb down into the hold and mess or tie up the cargo or do whatever they had to do with the cargo. So I was able to, as we was cruising down, I was able to see these steps and knew we were now getting into the levels of the cargo hold.
If the Britanic was carrying munitions, there was a good chance that they may have been stored here. But the cargo holds are found undisturbed and empty. Team 2 is on the other side of the ship.
As I'm dropping down, I can see this one section where it looks like just a big piece of the outer skin of the ship is just hanging there. You can still see the little portholes, And I dropped right down below that, and something caught my eye. And as I pushed the camera in, I realized it was a toilet, of all things, to see there's a toilet. And I go to moving around, there's a couple of sinks, and I pushed the camera in a little further, and next thing you know, I can make out the tiles in the bathroom. And I'm like, could not believe that you could still make out the tiles in the floor of the bathroom after, 85 years now? To me, that's just truly amazing that it has been preserved like it has.
Besides their main goals, the team has a secondary mission. Like Titanic, the centerpiece of this ship was the grand staircase, which was topped by an elaborate dome of stained glass. Was it possible that the dome could have survived? One of the dive teams sets out to find the answer.
And when I dropped in, what I noticed was, I almost looked back at my dive buddy, who was Barry Miller at the time, almost looked back at him and said, where the hell are we? There's no staircase here, there's no beautiful wood finishing. It's just this big empty room with this blue aura coming through it from the light. And I was just like, wow, this room is just really strange. Once we started to look around a little more, we started to realize that we were actually, in fact, in the grand staircase. And not only that, that things like the dome and all of that were now gone. And what we were seeing was the light coming through the weather cover. And that was creating that blue aura that we saw. And all the rubble was on the floor in that room. I mean, all the hospital beds and things that had fallen from the roof were now all on the ground.
In many ways, the GUE expedition provided me with one of my great disappointments, oddly enough. I always liked to think that the glass dome above the grand staircase was intact. I've always seen the weather cover outside the dome intact, and it made you want to believe that the dome beneath it was beautifully intact. Unfortunately, it's now been confirmed from the video footage that it wasn't to be. It's shattered. It's gone forever.
Two major goals remain: finding any of the watertight doors to see if they failed to close, and locating the reserve coal bunker, thought to contain the answers to the biggest mystery of all. The divers enter the Britanic to examine the ship's holds near the site of the explosion, looking for anything resembling munitions, bullets, shells, rifles. They find nothing.
We actually systematically went through the ship, cargo hold 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, systematically sent divers through the whole ship and eliminated the possibility of munitions.
They also search the debris field around the wreck and again find absolutely no trace of arms. Discovering any such materials would have had radical repercussions on every facet of the Britannic's story. Why she sank so quickly, and even what sank her. Carrying arms on board a hospital ship would constitute a violation of the Geneva Convention. The Germans had warned the Allied powers that they would attack, without hesitation, any such vessel transporting war materials. If she was indeed carrying arms, then the Britannic was inviting a torpedo. With time running out, the GUE team searches to find any clue to help locate their last targets: the 600-ton forward reserve coal bunker in cargo hold 3 and the watertight doors.
Each day was a crucial part of the planning for the next day. We could look at the footage, we'd identify areas that we wanted to go back and look at. We'd say, well, wait, we need to go back and go left in this area and look around in that region a little bit more. It looks like that area is covered very well. We definitely, there's nothing there. So it was an indispensable part of the whole project.
I always try to tell people that it's like taking the Empire State Building, turning it on its side,
And they see a plaque.
and then telling you to go find a bathroom on the 5th floor next to the elevator. And you're supposed to run in there within 25 minutes inside this building and find a bathroom. And that's impossible on dry land, much less having a diver go into this gigantic ship. He's got a bottom time of 25 to 35 minutes, and he's got to find this little door.
Unable to locate any of the watertight doors, the members of the GUE decide to focus their attention on the real prize: the forward reserve coal bunker, the main suspect in the theory of the secondary explosion. Many believe that it was another possible location for storing highly volatile munitions, but, more importantly, it would have stored the obvious: coal, which is also a highly explosive material.
And it was extremely hard to find for 2 or 3 days. We searched and searched and searched for it.
And Barry Miller comes over to me, kind of flashing his light. Hey, I think I found something interesting. and we go over and I pop through the little hole that he's pointing at and emerge into the completely intact coal bunker, all the coal sitting there as if it is waiting to be utilized. So look around and identify that in fact that area is very secure, and that the damage is outside of the coal bunker altogether and looks to be a lot more associated with the sinking and to some extent the original explosion that would have been from, say, a mine.
Beyond the conspiracies, the evidence proves that the Britannic's only cargo was her medical crew. The illusion of a secondary explosion may be attributed to something else. At 882 feet, the Britannic was considerably longer than the water she sank in. Amazingly, as she hit the ocean floor, her stern remained above water. The bow absorbed the weight of the entire ship, causing it to severely bend and almost detach completely, making it appear as if some explosive cargo within had detonated. The Britannic was nothing more than an innocent victim of war.
It's extremely likely, verging uncertain, that she struck a mine and that there was no secondary explosion.
The sinking of the Britannic would forever change the White Star Line, delivering the company its second devastating loss. The ship that was supposed to bring them back to prominence never once carried a paying passenger. But in death, she maintains a certain dignity. Unlike Titanic, which lies completely in ruin, and her other sister, the glorious Olympic, which was unceremoniously stripped and scrapped, today the Britannic remains well preserved at the bottom of the Kea Channel, a magnificent vessel that met her fate prematurely.